This right here are offices. This is a brick and mortar. These right here, though, is what you would typically use to set up what's called a virtual office address. Now, if you see it, it looks like it's an actual physical location, which is what you want it to look like when you're setting it up for your LLC or your corporation. In this video, I'm going to break down how you want to set this up, the resources that you can use along the way, and some pitfalls that you want to avoid because not every virtual office address is created equal. So why do people use virtual office addresses? Well, let's start at the top. The reason why you're going to set up a virtual office address for your LLC is to create anonymity and to protect yourself from having your information out there. Here's how this works. Let's say that you have a home-based business and you just set up your LLC, or you've had your LLC for some time, and you don't want your information all over the internet. If somebody does a reverse search on your LLC, now, are there different ways that somebody can find your address, or your information if it's not set up correctly through like Delaware, Nevada? Sure, but let's just keep it basic for now. If, let's say, somebody goes to search up your entity on the Secretary of State's website, it's really easy for them to just see what the principal address is the owner of the entity, which in this case would be you. So if you have your home-based business, then of course, like, that's your data right there all over the web. I don't know about you, but I like having some privacy. And so when you set up a virtual office address, you essentially are borrowing the address that you just saw in like the first 10, 15 seconds of the video. And so if someone goes to search up your address, that's what they're seeing. That's on the protection front. Here's where things get fun. If you're looking to take your business to the next level by getting access to business capital, one of the main factors that banks, financial institutions are going to look at is the validity of the address. Now, this is where setting it up correctly is super important, because it's not just about you picking a random business address or virtual office address from any company, right? One of the things that you want to pay attention to is if you do a reverse search on that address, there's two main things that you're going to pay attention to. Number one is the location of the virtual office address. So a good rule of thumb here is typically, especially if you're looking to get access to business capital at scale, you want to have it in a bank, in a bank dense populated area. What that means is if you were to look 20, 30-mile radius and like around that, you'd be able to see a ton of banks, ton of credit unions, ton of financial institutions. That means that you're going to have more options because banks have what's called a geo restriction, meaning they typically can't lend out either out of the state that the entity is located in. So if you set up a foreign entity, keep that in mind if you're setting it up in another state. And then the second thing is they can't typically fund or lend to any type of business outside of that 20, 30-mile radius, all things being equal. Now, there are some different ways that we work around it, but all things being equal, just to keep this super simple and streamlined. The second thing that you want to have when you are auditing a business address and when you're selecting the right business address is you don't want the business address to have any type of PMB attached to it. So that means that it's a personal mailbox number. So if you see PMB with a little pound sign, a little hashtag, that's no good. That's seen as essentially graded one and one the same as a PO box. And PO boxes and the business credit landscape is just automatic no-goes. Apart from having that PMB attached to the business address, you also don't want it to look like it's in some type of sketchy area, because remember what I just finished mentioning, where banks have geo restrictions around distance in terms of who they can or can't lend out to. They also can tell a lot about a business if it's located in a specific demographic on the likelihood of that business defaulting based off of the data that they've collected, again, demographically. You could be the best business. You can be running the best operations. You can have the best product, the best services, clientele, like perfect credit. I see it all the time when we're working with clients. And if they were to look at that address and then they look at their data, because they run it through their algorithm, and they see, wait a minute, about 40-50% of the businesses that come specifically from the zip code or that come specifically from this area or from this town right here tend to default. Now, this works at a micro level and it works at a macro level. Let me break this down really quickly. At a macro level, if you're setting it up in a state and historically the type of business that you're looking to get access to capital for using the address that you have, they're going to run it. They're going to say, in this state, typically that type of business model doesn't work, auto denial. The second fold is going to be at a micro level, which is what we just finished breaking down. So if they're looking at it from a town perspective or from a zip code perspective, again, using the example of like a restaurant, let's say 60% of the restaurants that tend to open up in this area on this street are an automatic no-go. So this is why you selecting the right virtual business address is super important for your LLC. Now, I'm going to give you a quick resource because I know a lot of people spend time trying to look up, hey, is Regus better? Is Opus better? Is iPostal? All of them, for the most part, are going to do the same exact thing. They're all going to range between 50 to 200, maybe even $300, depending on where you're located in the country, and also the type of features that you want attached to it. So if you want a virtual office address and it comes with the phone number, that's going to be an add-on. If you want a virtual office address and you maybe want to be able to work out of that space, that's obviously going to be more expensive. So I would budget for 50 to about $200 if you wanted to get a good virtual address. Now, even though it comes from Regus, even though it comes from Opus, iPostal, by the way, it doesn't have to be any of these. You can pick one just maybe that's in specifically in your side of town. You just want to make sure that it's a non-commercial mail receiving agency. That's number one. You want to make sure that it's not a private mailbox number. That's number two, because that's seen as a PO box. And then you just want to make sure that it actually looks like a physical location. I'm going to give you a quick bonus here. And I wasn't planning on doing it in this video, but I'm going to give it to you just because you've been with me for this time and I'm about to close this video out. And that's this. We were working with a client who was using a registered agent address. And I know that a lot of people harp on having a registered agent. Look, there's a time and a place for a registered agent. But I will say this, don't solely rely on having a registered agent give you their own virtual office address, because there's so many businesses that come attached to it. We ran an audit with this business, which is one of the first levers that we look at whenever we're helping a client install a business funding system into their business. By the way, if you need any help with this, like, book a call down below. But we were taking a look at his business. We ran an audit to it. And it looks like the registered agent that was letting them rent out the virtual office address that they set up for their entity, it had about, I'd be lying if I said it was anything less than 50. It had over 50 different businesses that were attached to this address. And so when we did a deeper search on it, the address that he had attached to his file actually had a like negative media attached to it. And so what that meant was that there was a white collar crime that had been committed inside of that address. And so every time he went out for funding, and I mean, this guy's file was prime. He was ready to go, legit business, driving a good revenue, fantastic credit. But every time he went out to try to get capital for his business, he kept getting denied. And so I said, hey, let's look at your address to see what it is. And so lo and behold, when we ran the reverse search, it was a non-commercial receiving agency, so non-CMRA, which is fantastic, but it had that negative media, like somebody had committing crime through it. And so every time he went out to the banks and they asked him for funding, they said no. Why? Well, it looks like you're essentially been committing crime out of that address, and right now it looks like you essentially opened up a new entity just to be able to do what you're doing now. So it looks like you're money laundering. And he said that has nothing to do with my business. And so the easy fix there, at least for his situation, is going to be different for everyone else. But for him, it was simply swapping out the registered agent and using a different business address. Now, at that point, could you use your own home-based business address if you don't care so much about anonymity? 100%. We still see clients getting access to business credit using that. Could he have used a brick and mortar? 100%. And then could he have used another virtual office address, which is what he did? Yes. But all in all, when you're looking at setting up a virtual office address, keep those things in mind, because it's not just about, again, attaching any type of address. You want to run it through this audit, because it's going to serve you far better in the long run, especially if your goal is to scale the capital that you're getting access to, and then also makes you running a business a heck of a lot smoother because there's one less thing to worry about.